Take a look around your house right now. Seriously, just take a quick scan. If you check the ingredients on your shampoo, your toothpaste, maybe that frozen pizza in the freezer, or even the lipstick on your counter, you're going to find one common denominator: palm oil. It's basically the invisible engine driving global consumer goods today. And in this explainer, we're unpacking the absolute epicenter of that global supply chain, which is Indonesia. We're going to look at the complete picture of Indonesian palm oil for the world's needs, pulling straight from the latest data and sources. Because right now, there is an incredibly high-stakes tension building in Indonesia as we look toward 2026. On one side, you've got these sweeping, massively ambitious macroeconomic policies from the government. But on the flip side, you have the raw, day-to-day micro-realities of the local farmers working at the grassroots level. So let's dive into this dynamic and see exactly how these two forces are colliding.
Here is our roadmap for today. 1. Global palm oil giant. 2. Fighting global pressure. 3. Single-door export policy. 4. B50 biodiesel ambition. 5. Voice of the farmers. And 6. The future of our palm oil.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Global Palm Oil Giant. $23 billion. Let's really anchor ourselves with that number for a second. That is the projected foreign exchange revenue generated by Indonesian palm oil exports for the year 2025 alone. When we talk about numbers this massive, we aren't just talking about a successful agricultural product anymore, right? We are talking about the absolute lifeblood of a developing economy. I mean, this is the level of revenue that builds national infrastructure, stabilizes the currency, and funds massive social programs. As President Prabowo Subianto has highlighted, palm oil isn't just a commodity. It stands shoulder to shoulder with coal and ferroalloys as a foundational pillar of the national economy. It's literally the financial engine keeping the country moving forward.
Now, behind that $23 billion is an almost unfathomable volume of physical product. Total production sits at an astonishing 56 million tons. Out of that, 32 million tons are exported directly into the global market to feed international demand. Just think about the sheer logistics required there. Harvesting, processing, and shipping 32 million tons of oil across the world's oceans every single year. This ratio between what's produced domestically and what gets shipped overseas, it proves exactly why Indonesia holds this undisputed, titanic position in the global supply chain. If Indonesian production even just stumbles, the entire global market feels the shockwave. Moving on to Section 2, Fighting Global Pressure.
Of course, being the undisputed giant on the world stage inevitably puts a huge target on your back. The international community, specifically the European Union, has been applying intense pressure through policies like the EUDR, which is the European Union Deforestation Regulation. Basically, this is a strict traceability law that effectively labels palm oil as a high-risk commodity. It threatens to block imports entirely unless producers can prove their supply chains are 100% deforestation-free. Well, as you can imagine, this has sparked a fierce geopolitical pushback. President Prabowo has taken a deeply defiant stance, famously declaring that Indonesia is the master of its own house and it's time to set their own rules. The government views these foreign regulations not just as environmental safeguards, but as direct infringements on their national sovereignty and economic autonomy.
So this really begs the question, if the European Union continues to build these regulatory blockades, how exactly does Indonesia secure its own palm oil sovereignty and protect its most vital economic asset? That brings us right to Section 3, the single-door export policy. The government's answer to that question is a complete and total overhaul of how natural resources leave the country. And they are moving at lightning speed to centralize exports. By May 2026, a new policy is officially announced. By June, a brand new massive state-owned enterprise called Danantara, or DSI, begins supervising exports. And then, boom, by January 2027, DSI takes full control. But why this sudden, dramatic shift to a single-door policy? Well, it's all about stopping capital flight and a sneaky practice called under-invoicing. Under-invoicing is basically when exporters intentionally underreport the value of the goods they're shipping out, which lets them dodge taxes and quietly park their profits in offshore accounts. By forcing every single drop of export palm oil, coal, and ferroalloy to go through one state-controlled door, the government intends to capture every single cent of revenue that rightfully belongs to the nation. Now for Section 4, the B50 biodiesel ambition. Beyond just centralizing exports, there is an equally aggressive domestic strategy at play here, which is essentially weaponizing palm oil for national security. Look, we live in a highly volatile world. Geopolitical disruptions, particularly the escalating conflicts in the Middle East, are constantly threatening global shipping lanes and driving up the cost of crude oil. For a country that imports heavily to meet its fuel needs, those price spikes are economically devastating. To insulate the nation from these global shocks, the government is accelerating the mandatory B50 biodiesel program in 2026. If you're not familiar, B50 means that the diesel fuel pumped into millions of trucks and buses across the country will be a blend of 50% fossil fuel and 50% domestic palm oil. It is a bold, incredibly rapid pivot toward true energy independence.
But here's where it gets wild. When you suddenly divert millions of tons of palm oil away from the export market and pour it into domestic fuel tanks, you fundamentally alter global economics. Supply shrinks, but demand remains high. Because of this massive B50 push, global crude palm oil prices are projected to surge dramatically, hitting 4,600 ringgit Malaysia per ton by the second quarter of 2026. There are even projections suggesting it could break the $1,000 per ton ceiling. Now, from a macro perspective, the government sees this as a huge win because higher global prices mean richer state revenues.
Which leads us to Section 5, Voice of the Farmers. However, as we all know, high-level macroeconomic wins don't always translate to grassroots prosperity. We have to look at the profound disconnect between the state's top-down goals and the bottom-up fears of the millions of smallholder farmers actually out there growing the crop. The government's goal is definitely noble: prevent revenue leakage, maximize state funds, and ensure national sovereignty. But the farmers? They're looking at this single-door export policy and seeing a truly terrifying word: monopsony. A monopsony is a market condition where there's only one buyer. If the state-owned enterprise is the only entity legally allowed to export, they completely dictate the price. So farmers are genuinely fearing this monopoly will cause the local prices of their fresh fruit bunches to absolutely crash, devastating their livelihoods while the profits are captured by a select few at the very top. And this anxiety is actively being voiced by major agricultural organizations. Dartho from the Palm Oil Farmers Organization, or POPSI, points out that the global palm oil trade is incredibly complex. It's far more integrated and scrutinized than commodities of the past. He warns that throwing a blanket of state centralization over the entire industry is highly, highly risky. Remember the European Union's demands for traceability we talked about earlier? Well, centralizing everything under a state monopoly might actually backfire, creating a negative global perception regarding transparency and governance. Instead of proving to the world that Indonesian palm oil is clean and traceable, it might just confirm international fears and isolate the industry even further.
Finally, Section 6, the future of our palm oil. Looking toward 2026, the entire industry is walking a terrifyingly thin tightrope. The government must somehow pull off this impossible balancing act. They need to burn enough palm oil domestically to hit their B50 energy goals, while simultaneously exporting enough to maintain that vital $23 billion revenue stream. Most importantly, they must protect the local farmers from market crashes. And sitting right at the heart of all this is a massive, ticking time bomb at the grassroots level. 2.8 million hectares of smallholder palm plantations urgently require replanting. You see, oil palm trees lose their productivity as they age. Cutting them down and planting new ones means going 3 to 4 years with absolutely zero income, a financial gap most local farmers simply cannot survive without help. Plus, much of this replanting is entirely stalled right now due to complex, overlapping forestry zoning laws.
So I'll leave you with this ultimate question facing the nation in the years ahead. Can Indonesia successfully assert its sovereignty on the global stage, secure its domestic energy grid, and maximize its macro wealth without completely sacrificing the prosperity and survival of its own local farmers in the process? Finding that exact equilibrium is going to define the future of the industry, the economy, and the millions of families who depend on it every single day.